Hello and welcome to the final session of the afternoon. We are going to be dealing with the future of the newsroom today. I thought we might have the summary on screen, but we don't. But I'll just do a quick introduction of our panelists. Chris Johns is the Chief Engineer, in charge of Broadcast Strategy, Sky News UK. Mark Harrison is the Managing Director of DPP. We have Alfonson de Gaetano, who's the Director of Google Global Partnerships Emerging Markets, based in Dubai, not far away from us. You may be familiar by now with Morwen Williams, Head of News Gathering Operations at the BBC. She's my panel buddy. I've done 3 panels. She's been on all of them. You'll find out why shortly. Giles Trendle, Managing Director, Al Jazeera English. So the brief, and because it's not up there, I'm just going to read it off for you from my little screen. Old-fashioned paper. What will journalism of the future look like? The media landscape being shaken up, new technologies, platforms, players, trends, all challenging, even threatening established market leaders. What are we to make of this innovative disruption? How is the role of news reporting and program making going to change? And will this change be for the better or the worse? And I think the answer to that question depends on who it is that you're talking to. I'm going to start with Chris Johns, because we had an interesting chat over lunch as we were prepping for this. As the Chief Engineer of Broadcast Strategy at Sky, I am sure from time to time, journalists at Sky come to you and say, how long do I have left in the industry? Are you able, Chris, to provide them with comfort and honesty in the same response? What about the future of people in newsrooms?
Okay, so you're putting me on the spot here, but yeah, it was a quick discussion we had over lunch, and it was based on everything I've heard over the past couple of days. It may be a little controversial. It's not what I necessarily believe, but it's an interesting concept. Now, you see that nowadays people are shooting footage with cameras, but iPhones as well, very, very self-shooting, user-generated content. Now, with all the artificial intelligence discussions that have been going on, it's a case of why can't just the users shoot the footage on the iPhones, deliver them to a central repository, let artificial intelligence take over, create a script, give that to the newsroom, and then that's just put in front of a presenter to read it out or voice over it. Now, the only thing the journalist, inverted commas, then has to do is be a moderator. So you ask the question, is it the end of a journalist, or does a journalist turn into a moderator of the newsroom of the future? It's an interesting concept, but as people have described, things are changing at such a rapid rate now. This may well be something that happens in the future, and I know that there's somebody probably 4 seats away from me, 3 seats away from me, who may well vehemently disagree with this.
For the purposes of the panel, feel free to jump in. Just let me know when you want to come in, but I would suggest, and I hate saying this to the engineer, if the microphone could be a little closer, people will be able to hear your wise words slightly better. Go, Morwen. Do you want to click that, or are you up?
There we go. It should be working. There we go.
I think that's better.
As the journalist on the panel, I sort of don't see it quite the way Chris sees it. In my view, you do still need the journalist, but you need to take on those tools that we've talked about this morning, and some of them, and use those to help tell our stories. So instead, and I don't say it in a room with so many great cameramen, and you're doing a great job, fellas, but that actually could we in the future do this, as Ali was saying this morning, remotely, and just train the cameras what to do, and do a session like this remotely, and then maybe save a bit of money, or dare we say that, and then put that money into the journalism that actually telling the stories, breaking the stories. So I keep coming back to the Yemen story only because we just won an international news award for it. But we were one of the people that brought that story to the world because people weren't going in there and telling that story. And if you can then invest in that story, which was both an expensive story to do, but so worthwhile, but also clearly a very dangerous story to do, then I think you will need the journalist for that thing. But if we can go halfway between Chris and halfway to me, then we've got quite a good marriage there of, yes, let's use some of this technology to do some of the slightly more day-to-day journalism and storytelling, but use the people to go that extra mile.
Halfway between you and Chris is Mark Harrison, roughly. What do you think?
Well, I think change is never linear. That's one thing we've learned.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that if you predict out in a straight line from where you currently are, you're going to be wrong. I mean, look, I'm looking along this line. I think that all but one of us are wearing analog watches. And so 20 years ago, you'd have said we'd all be wearing digital watches, and 5 years ago, you'd say we'll be wearing smart watches. And we're not, for all sorts of interesting human and cultural reasons. So similarly, when you take this, we're going to find that the use of technology and AI extends into editorial in ways we never expected, but we're also going to find that the human input and the editorial extends in ways that we never expected. We're not quite sure what they are yet, but I find it very hard to believe that there won't continue to be considerable need for human input. And in some senses, although the numbers of people may not increase, the value of that input will just get greater and greater as the need for certainty around the credibility of journalism gets stronger and stronger.
Morwen's background, Giles, or her title has to do with news gathering operations. You're the managing director of Al Jazeera English. You manage one of the bigger newsrooms in the world. How do you see yourself managing this stuff that's coming down the pipe and still being able to preserve the journalism and perhaps preserve the personnel?
So I have to say I'm very excited by everything that I've heard yesterday and today. I think we, as journalists, and let me speak as a journalist, as maybe Morwen as well, we have two dynamics. We are going to jump ahead and embrace the technology and everything that means, while at the same time we will stand still. And what I mean by stand still, we will hold firm to the principles of professional journalism. So accuracy, accountability, independence, impartiality, some of the things that were mentioned this morning. And those are crucial skills that will be very difficult, I think, to replicate. Of course, the technology can augment the journalism, but I think the role of the journalist will change. Increasingly, our journalists, they just used to do a piece to camera, a TV package. Now they're doing a piece to camera. They'll be on Twitter, they'll be doing a Facebook Live, they'll be doing a Periscope, they'll be doing a Snapchat. They have so many other challenges to deal with, but this is where we need to be, and I embrace it while keeping the principles of professional journalism.
One catchphrase kind of caught my eye, because I'm just that shallow, this week, is suggesting that news organizations may want to move away from a CEO model to a CAO model. Alfonso, the term is Chief Algorithmic Officer. Beyond the catchphrase, what do you think of that?
So, at Google, we definitely believe that technology can bring a lot of new opportunities. And really, our objective is to make sure that we can sustain news organizations to really continue to invest in quality journalism. And in order to do that, how can news organizations look at technology and in general at AI in order to also generate, let's say, the revenues that they have, that they can, let's say, get in order to continue to invest in a quality newsroom and all the rest. So we see a lot of different applications in AI, and we believe there are two critical applications. One is to really improve user experience with things like personalization of content or like content recommendation. And we see also a lot of interesting opportunities in helping news organizations to increase revenues. And this is everything related to there are a lot of efforts in building, let's say, subscription business for news organizations. And so how do we use AI to help, let's say, news organization ideally to identify what are the potential users that might subscribe to packages and eventually help them really increase their revenues. So we believe that having the right capabilities, so having this kind of figure within the organization becomes critical to really deal with the big changes that we are seeing from a user behavior standpoint. So, we are seeing users spending now incredible amount of time in social media, incredible amount of time on mobile, there is an element of how can news organizations really create the right assets to really continue to be relevant to users, instead of just having users spending time on properties where eventually they cannot get quality journalism. So all these aspects are really important, and that's why we believe that news organizations should have this kind of capabilities in their organization.
Eventually, we will want to get to questions from the audience. So what I'd like you to do, if you do have questions for us, we're going to continue as a panel in a moment. Put your hand up, and a microphone will find you. But if we get organized early on that, it's going to save us some time. What about the journalists, Morwen, Giles? That term, CAO, Chief Algorithmic Officer. Do you fear your organizations becoming, in your future newsrooms, slaves to the algorithm?
Slaves is a strong word. Algorithms.
Well, historically, people have been enslaved.
Algorithms, of course, we have concerns about algorithms when they affect, for example, the running order or what appears on your newsfeed on Facebook, for example. But then algorithms can, I was listening to Ali Shah this morning talking about how algorithms can help with the editing process in the TV studio, the idea of how artificial intelligence can help with the search. I don't know if you've seen the movie called The Post, which was nominated for an Oscar, but they got the Pentagon Papers, and you had about 10 journalists with thousands of pages of documents on the floor going through these documents with artificial intelligence. I mean, wow, I was thinking what the potential is, the incredible potential for journalists. Just coming back to the fears, what we spoke about yesterday, again, allow me to be cynical, if I may, as a journalist. Not negative, but cynical. I think there's a value in cynicism, in asking the right questions. The cloud does concern us. Technological security is a concern, but also political security. I think we're living in a region where we have seen governments can shut down and can freeze assets and the cloud, and it's a concern that are the companies who own and run the cloud, are they liable or are they susceptible to political pressure? We have experience in Al Jazeera where Snapchat blocked us in Saudi Arabia. I know that the cloud has, technologists like to say, trust us. Those are not words that inspire confidence in journalists. And when you're talking about, I know that there was talk of banks and governments are using the cloud, so everything should be okay. Well, banks can have their assets frozen. Buildings can be shut down. There's a building in New York, which is Fifth Avenue, which is still owned by the Iranians, which has never properly been resolved, and it's being possibly going to be seized even now by the US federal government. So there's a concern. That's not to be negative. As I said, I'm very excited by what the cloud and artificial intelligence can do, but there are concerns that personalists have that I think with the technologists and the vendors we can address.
Morwen?
I think the personalisation thing worries me slightly that people will only get stories that they're interested in, and actually sometimes they need to know a different story out there. And sometimes there are stories that are so important that people really need to know. But maybe I think the new digital platforms really enable us to connect with people better. And so you can tell a story from, I keep going back to Yemen, but Syria, and I use this example when we were talking earlier at lunchtime. If a mother's lost a child in Syria, you can just tell that story from the angle of the mother and on digital. And actually somebody who doesn't think they're interested in that story will maybe find that story, and if it's promoted, and they will then engage more with that story and work out what that story means for them. Whereas, without being patronising, they might just not think they're interested in it and not regard regard it as something that affects them so many miles away. And I think that's always been the story we face. But I think it offers us opportunities now to engage with those audiences, because they may not watch our main news bulletin, but if they're coming to the digital platform, they might find our other content on the digital platform. So maybe I'm being a bit optimistic there, but I'm rather hoping that the algorithms will steer people towards, if it keeps them in their own bubble, that's a problem. If it helps get them outside, just vaguely outside that bubble, then I think that's helpful.
Yeah, there are already companies, like utility companies, that sell themselves on the fact that though they might cost a bit more, you get to speak to a sort of a normal human being rather than to a call center, right? And in, of course, 5 or 10 years' time, that call center will all be automated anyway, so you'll be speaking to a kind of chatbot. I wonder whether one of the developments we might see around news, and if you like, around high-quality information, is that actually people who really value it will pay for it, and actually pay for information that has not been overly mediated by AI, and you'll end up with this kind of well-informed, less well-informed kind of split, which will actually also split across economic lines, because those with the money to afford to have that kind of highly mediated, human-based information will pay to do so.
I just want to pick up on your term earlier, Chris. You said journalists could become news moderators in the future. I think that was your term, wasn't it?
Yes.
And I just think, some of the people who are journalists here, they may have gone to journalism school. They didn't go to moderating school. I'm not sure that's going to sit well with them.
Well, it also extends, and you can look at it the other way around when we talk about the chief algorithm officer, because all the algorithm officer would be doing is making sure that the algorithms are correct to deliver the neutrality. Now, surely that's just what an editor does in a newsroom. So I don't think anything's changed within the newsroom necessarily, but you're just putting somebody who does something now into an automatic world and giving him a new name, a totally different name. So in one breath, you can take it to the extreme and say you can self-shoot everywhere and you can get all the automatic facilities at your disposal to actually create a program. Yes, that's possible, but will it be neutral? Will you have the right balance? I don't know. You still need the journalist there to actually put the correct slant on the story. And of course, as Morwen said, some of the best stories are the unknown stories, the curveballs that come at you, the ones that there are no algorithms that can actually predict. So you have to cater for those, and that still requires a human who can see a story, see something that's artistically different in the world, and pick up on that and say, that's going to roll, that's going to be of interest, that is different. And incidentally, just for everybody, I'm the one without the analog watch, so I'm the most technologically advanced in the room, and the engineer.
Alfonso, you're sitting in the middle, you work with Google, and Google in the news through algorithm to audience chain is the middleman. Do organizations like yours feel any kind of responsibility to help news organizations find their way to audiences in 2018?
Yes, we actually do. We have really different initiatives that we are focusing on to support news organizations. And we go along 5 different areas. The first one that maybe also you guys, might be aware is what we do with News Lab. So everything about storytelling. And we have trained over the past 4 years 500,000 journalists on how to use digital tools to produce quality content in this new digital world. And that's just one element. The second element is around building audiences. And actually, we do this throughout all our platforms, from search. Just search still represents around 35% of the overall news referrals that news websites are getting. And this is coming for free, and it comes from Google News or it comes from Google Search. The other key trend that is happening, we are seeing more and more users turning to digital video platforms, like for example YouTube, to go and understand what's happening, what are the breaking news, especially following major world events. Already today, we have more than 5 million hours of news videos being watched on YouTube every single day. And the third thing where we are investing a lot is really around mobile. And on mobile, we launched our open source mobile solution that is AMP, Accelerated Mobile Pages. And really the objective of AMP is to keep the mobile web open. So we want to support news organizations in having a direct relationship with the end user. And we want to avoid that walled garden might dictate business terms on news organizations. As I said, we are really making a big effort in really trying to, let's say, make the news industry very healthy and sustainable.
I just want to ask Morwen and Giles, direct engagement with audiences is another one of those terms that's, I guess it's no longer a buzzword because it's been around for a while, but how much time should news organizations spend trying to find their way, to navigate their way through third parties such as Google, such as Facebook, to get that direct engagement? And is direct engagement, when you're talking about a middleman, an oxymoron?
I mean, direct engagement is, I think, particularly for the BBC, really quite important. We've gone not particularly through the middleman, but direct engagement through local TV, and we've got a new local project. We've gone even more local into the UK, and I think we've recognised that that's something that people really want is that direct engagement. So that's one thing that we're doing through the platforms. I think, we need to utilise and use those platforms. We can't be too proud and standoffish and stick back just because we're the BBC and we've got 90-odd years of tradition. Of course we need to engage and use them and to get to people that way. If that's where people will find our news, then Google's the way they'll do it. Most people, my mum is 82, she knows the verb to Google because she does that. And so, it's the word everybody knows, and that's how we engage with the content.
Do we have any questions from the audience yet? We have a hand over here. Can we get a microphone to this gentleman? Yes, it's coming. There we are.
Direct engagement for Al Jazeera is very important as well. In 2011, we launched a show called The Stream, which was all about engagement with our audience. And in fact, we were sort of live streaming the editorial meeting, which the audience could view and tweet in before the show and make their comments. And part of the raison d'etre of the show is to have the audience drive the topics that are going to be covered. So that's very important. The very first episode of The Stream launched on, I think it was May the 2nd in 2011, which is the day Osama bin Laden was killed. And
you got lucky.
We got lucky. We had, there was somebody tweeting from Abbottabad where he was killed. And through the audience engagement, we got that guy who was witnessing the helicopters flying, had witnessed that, and we got him on Skype. And that was the very first episode, and it was just a good example of direct engagement. You wouldn't have got him any other way, would you? We wouldn't have got him any other way. We got him through Twitter. We found, our team found him, he was tweeting, we got him, we put him on air through Skype.
We have a question here now, and there's another question. So once this question, if you wouldn't mind standing up so we get a look at you, feel free to tell us your name. And then once this question is asked, if I could ask our friend here, hello? Yeah, if you could then take the microphone over to this gentleman once that question is asked. But please, go ahead.
Hello, name is Suhaib. Speaking of curveballs, I'll throw one at you guys and Chief Algorithm Officer. How do you teach an AI satire? Snapchat censoring Al Jazeera, Facebook is marking The Onion as fake news, and that's a slap on Moliere's face if you call satire fake news. So that's the question I have. How do you teach it that?
Well, you asked actually a question I asked myself this morning, yes, and satire depends on cynicism, and I mentioned cynicism as a healthy, it doesn't need to be a negative. Cynicism is about being skeptical and asking critical questions. And I have the same question, so I will shut up because I don't have the answer. How do you teach artificial intelligence those sorts of human, what is the fundamental of journalism? To ask tough questions. And that's why I personally don't think journalists are out of the business.
Alfonso, does Google have a satire department working furiously?
Not yet, but that's something good to bring back to our product team.
Because when you think about it,
Right,
you
very
know,
interesting.
especially, I don't know how many of you people are paying attention to the American media landscape, but as things have changed in U.S. media, their late-night comedy shows, be it Jon Stewart succeeded by Trevor Noah, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, the lot of them, I mean, a good chunk of Americans now get their daily news fix through a comedic filter, and if the algorithms can't recognize sarcasm from truth, those people are going to have a big problem. And they're not going to get it to laugh as much because the stuff is going to be filtered out. Anyone else got any thoughts on that, on technology and humor?
I think if you have those filters in, you can get rid of sarcasm completely, and it'll make life a lot simpler, wouldn't it?
No. Are you being sarcastic? We have a question over here in the corner. Sometimes I have difficulty understanding myself. We have a question here as well? Okay, so we'll take this microphone in here. Please, go ahead, sir.
أسعد الله أوقاتكم بالخير. الدكتور حريوي أستاذ المعلوماتية في جامعة عدن اليمن. أنا أود الإشارة إلى أنه التطور التكنولوجي التسونامي اللي يسير بخطوات سريعة، وخاصة فيما يتعلق بالذكاء الاصطناعي والإنسان الآلي والبيانات الضخمة، لن يلغي اللي هو الجانب الإبداعي للإعلامي، بل سيساعده على اللي هو المزيد من الإبداع والمزيد من التميز والتألق. أنا أريد أسأل بشكل مباشر الزملاء التكنولوجيين فيما يخص، هل ممكن تساعد اللي هي تكنولوجيا الذكاء الاصطناعي وأيضا التكنولوجيا معالجة البيانات الضخمة في إعطاء استخلاصات لأذواق المشاهدين، ويعني وفيما يخص أيضا اللي هي البرامج المطلوبة والأخبار التي يودوا متابعتها، وبذلك يكون يعني عامل مساعد لتطور أداء كل قناة من قنوات الإعلام الفضائية. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you.
Giles, Trendle, are you able to provide? Oh, go ahead, Rawa.
I'm going to leave it to Rawa.
So he was saying that the technology tsunami happening very fast, especially AI, but he still thinks that it won't cancel the role of journalists, but will make journalists more creative. But his question is, can AI and all the technology advancement in processing information help news networks and as well entertainment in knowing more about the audience and hence giving them news more? I don't know if news would be more to their taste, but at least entertainment more to their taste. And will it be able to direct the taste of audience towards more programs than the others? I guess that will be TV on demand.
What do you think, Mark? I mean, do news organizations need AI to understand audiences, or do they already know enough?
Well, actually, I think if I'm getting the thrust of your question correctly, I think the challenge actually for news organizations is going to be about trying to retain any kind of centrality in people's lives. That I think that people will start to get their news from a much greater range of sources. And in fact, it's something that I think many of us are already observing. If we have, children who are now adults and who are consuming news, I mean, I certainly find that my older children are better informed than I am. And it's because they have a greater diversity of inputs of news because of digital media. So actually, I think what we're getting at here is the way, in fact, that machine learning can actually come to offer the audience that diversity, just as much as it might help the news station to try and reach more audiences.
I see you nodding, Chris. Do you have anything to add?
I think the only doubt that springs into mind is making sure you don't apply any censorship within that artificial intelligence or the learning curve, so to speak. So if there's any filtering, any removal of things that could be salient to the artistic intent of a journalist downstream, that's a negative. You've got to make sure that too much gets through so somebody can filter it somewhere down the stream. So that intelligence part needs to be very, very flexible. And that's effectively the job of the editor or the journalist at the end of the day, to work out whether something is of artistic relevance to be delivered to the consumer and not filtered out by something artificial further downstream. Because traditionally, with hundreds and hundreds of feeds coming in, you have to do some filtering. At the moment, you can do some of it automatically by knowing the sources and knowing duplications, but you still need that human to identify the best quality feed coming in from multiple sources and the most relevant feed to your territory. So yes, there needs to be filtering. You do it nowadays, but how intelligent that filtering, you've got to be very, very careful you don't filter out something inadvertently that you'd rather like to have.
Actually, we see at least the efforts that we are making are much less on filtering, while they are much more on being part of coalitions together with news organizations, non-profit, entrepreneurs, and so on, in really trying to fix the issue of fake news and verification. For example, we are part of the Trust Project, where there is the objective of distinguish between authoritative and fake or promotional content, but also try to set the standards for indicators of trustworthiness in articles. So I think really the focus of AI for now is really on how do we make sure that we can, let's say, reduce the number of articles that have fake news instead of really trying to filter stuff within articles. And I think that's really the most important thing. So we want to make sure that, in general, users can have access to very different sources, okay, when they're looking for something. We don't want to filter anything. We just want to make sure they understand that the facts that are within the articles are real facts and they are not fake. Okay, but we also did a study, and we saw that on average, when a user is searching for something on Google News or Google Search, they look at more than 4 different sources all the time, meaning that they actually have access to, let's say, different, let's say, news organizations or in general news or different websites to understand what's happening around that topic. Okay, and so we don't see the sort of filter bubbles that people talk about on social media happening on search engines. Okay, so this is a bit the view that we have.
I believe there was another question here, and is there a question after that? We have a question, if the next micro question will come from here. I'm loving the quality of the questions, so much better than mine. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Mia Swart. I'm from the Brookings Institute here in Doha. And my question is really on something people were assured about this morning, which is that journalism, is not redundant, journalists are not redundant. But my question is really, what about the quality of journalism? What about, that investigative urge or the quality of writing, in the sense that, okay, to get back to also use an example about airplanes, there was a program recently on why that Air France flight, plane fell, the one that disappeared and that, wasn't found for a long time, and the ultimate conclusion was that it fell because the autopilot function failed on the plane, and the pilot was probably not, was so reliant on the autopilot function that he couldn't basically manage the plane in the absence of the autopilot function. So I'm just wondering what journalists, whether they wouldn't start deferring to AI too much and then lose that investigative urge, right? And I'm also concerned about the very language that is used here and the thinking, but it's more widespread, of course, to say we still need humans, right? Isn't that the first sign that the battle has been lost? To start justifying yourself, like your usefulness as a human, that this is rhetoric that can be turned around. And then thirdly, sorry, I know I'm rushing through this, is just that in terms of how I see children using cell phones incessantly and all the time, right? My sense is that people's brains are being altered to a state where you keep different tabs open all the time, right? You're not on one tab. And if you're watching even Al Jazeera with the subtitles running, it's almost not enough tabs for you anymore, right? So one positive function I could see here is the multiple tabs idea that you don't have whether it's BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, whatever news network, sort of selecting for you what they consider the important news is and all the politicization that comes with that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Can I say something about that? I feel quite strongly about
100%.
This. Yeah, partly because my first career was as a historian. And You can go back and back and back and back and back, and with every development of society, it's always predicted that it's all going to go to the dogs, that things are going to get worse. You know, people might remember a book by a man called Neil Postman, I think in the 1990s, called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And it was about how the way we all watched television was going to make us all stupid. Well, you know, it never happened. And, you know, we've heard so many times that books are going to disappear. It's never happened. We've heard that music was just going to become robotic. You know, it never happened. We heard the movies were going to die at one time. They're greater than ever. Television content is greater than it's ever been. The quality is greater than ever. You know, who are the people who are currently bringing a major political change in America around gun laws? Those very young people who are using social media to consume news. So I can see no reason to believe that never mind what technology change we're going to have, that we won't keep on having absolutely fantastic journalism.
I know Morwen wants to get in on this, but just to that point, when I raised my kids, I was worried they were spending too much time on social media. When my parents raised me, they thought I was spending too much time watching television. When their parents raised them, they thought that they were addicted to the radio. And in the latter part of the 19th century, after the printing press went mass for the first time, parents were complaining that their kids were reading too many novels. Morwen, I know you want in on AI and journalism skills.
Well, it's just really about, if you bring it all back to the fundamental thing that binds us all, whether gender, race, whatever it is, age, we all love a good story. And a good story well told. And if we can do that, whether it's the and finally at the end, whether it's the investigative journalism like Phil does, whatever it is, if it's the stuff that takes 3 months or the stuff that can take 3 hours, there will always be an urge within people to tell stories, and there will always be an urge for people to consume stories, and that's the bit that gives me hope about this.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think I'm again, as I said, I'm positive about the change and all the
Wait
technology.
a second, you were cynical a few minutes ago.
No, I am cynical because I am a journalist, and that's part of our job profession, but that doesn't mean we can be excited. My main course is excitement, and my side dish is cynicism, let's put it that way. But as long as the artificial intelligence doesn't have inherent biases and filters, and that's what we have to be careful about. But otherwise, as I said, the potential is huge to aid the help of the journalist and allow the journalist not to do all the donkey work of looking through 1,000 documents, but and I think there's a recognition of the value, increasingly a recognition in the value of investigative journalism. I think, as I said, The Post was nominated for an Oscar award yesterday. It didn't win, but 3 years ago, Spotlight, I don't know if you saw that film, won the Oscar for Best Picture about the Boston Globe and the investigation. At Al Jazeera English, we have 4 documentary strands, 4 investigative documentary strands. I started my job at Al Jazeera Arabic on the foremost investigative show in the Arab world. So for us at Al Jazeera, investigative journalism is absolutely something that we're going to carry on with.
I'm going to out-cynicize you, because I've got a theory on the films. I loved Spotlight. I loved that movie to death, just the way it was made, the area that it covered. And I was around.
But the fact that there are 2 Hollywood films on investigative journalism in the last 3 years.
I think people love seeing journalism unfolding through a screenwriter like Josh Silver, who wrote both those screenplays. And they will pay money to go see those films or to stream those films. But when you want them to pay money for a subscription to a news organization, a journalistic brand to whom they are loyal, that's where the loyalty ends. So I mean, that's my cynical take on this kind of disconnect that you have, that when told through Hollywood, journalism appears to be very popular. But when it's time to pony up $5 a month, people draw the line, save the money, and give it to Netflix.
Some people, but you know, The Guardian is crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. More and more journalists are doing that. There is still a lot of investigative journalism out there that is free.
Yeah, awesome investigative journalism. The consortium-based stuff is is tremendous and very, very important. We have a question from over here. And is there another question after this, please? Any other hands? Any more questions from the audience? Because they've been good so far. And your microphone's off.
I'm Tahir Mazaini from Al Jazeera. Just referring back to what Chris said at the beginning about people uploading their content, AI sort of gathering news of the day, and the journalist as a moderator. Isn't that sort of effectively what YouTube already does to some extent in sort of a simpler form? So what do the panel see? Do they see Google as evolving to become a competitor, or is it a partner? Because we seem to be already at the stage that sort of Chris was talking about.
Let's start with Chris and maybe move to Alfonso after.
So it was, well, what I was saying was is a hypothesis at this point in time. But as you say, technology moves so quickly, we don't know when it will become reality. The but on this is you still have to have a shaping of that story. Just putting it out in the raw is exactly as you're describing it. It is just user-generated content with some intelligence behind it to make it look a little bit better. You still need the art which comes within the broadcast television or the journalistic, the newsroom, to actually fashion that content into something that somebody who wants to watch quality programming will actually want to consume. And that extends not just to the quality of the story itself, but the quality of the imagery as well. We all know that if you're in a war zone, you'll have proxy views coming back, very, very poor images coming back. But that's telling the story from an emotive side because you're at the heart of the action. Later on, during the day, you'll stream a high-quality feed coming back, which will tell a greater fashion part of the story. And if you have the luxury of shooting and actually being able to edit on site, you may be able to deliver something like an HD feed, which is telling a more artistic, fuller version of the story. So there are various versions of it. So from one extent, I started off by saying, yes, you could deliver the most basic stories back to the journalist, back to the newsroom, and have it self-fashioned by automation. But feeding into what we said from what the BBC were talking about is, you really want to have the art behind it. So that's the dichotomy, is do you want cheap journalism, which is all done by automation, or do you want quality journalism, which you have to pay a little bit for? And that's probably the tail end of the conversation we've just had.
I think YouTube, has been a very successful platform. And that's what we are. We are a platform. We don't produce any content. And we have around 100 hours of content being uploaded on YouTube every single minute. Okay, 100 hours. And so incredible amount of content. And it's an opportunity also for news organizations in general to, let's say, have their content there. And we are making big efforts in making sure that we can expose the great content in the best possible way. So we had quite a few changes in the past. Let's say adding live streaming from news organizations. We now added the breaking news section on our YouTube homepage. So we are really trying to make the best possible efforts to really expose the great content that is available on YouTube for users. But we believe that, we want to stay in the platform business, and we really want to partner with the best possible organization to make sure that they can monetize their content in the best possible way. At the end of the day, I believe that news organizations have an opportunity through all these platforms to expose the great content that they have. And it's important for them to actually expose the content where people are spending time. And that's then a way for them to try to bring the users on their own platform in order to build, let's say, more trusted relationship, better engagement, and even possibly higher revenues. I just want to touch on the subscription piece as well, because we talked about that. That's where we are really betting in a big way, because we are seeing that news organizations are really not able with digital revenue so far to offset the decline that they had in the offline business. If you just look at US, for example, the US organizations, news organizations had $60 billion in revenues in 2000, and this declined to $20 billion in 2015, wiping out 50 years of gain, okay, just in the past 15 years. And when you look at the online digital revenues, this is still a very, very small percentage of the revenues. So we believe that the only way to sustain news organizations to really invest in quality journalism is to add them on subscriptions. And there was actually a digital news report from Reuters. It's a survey that ran last year, where actually the percentage of people that are willing to pay for quality journalism, okay, it ranged between 26% in countries like Japan or UK to 37% in Spain, 33% in US, and so on.
Are these people who spend the money on subscriptions or say they are willing
These
to?
are people that read news. So if they read news, they are willing to spend on quality news content in the next 12 months. So meaning that if news organizations like New York Times, for example, they were very successful in building a subscription digital business model.
They have Donald Trump to thank for that.
Yes.
They did.
But actually, I mean, the problem that we had with news organizations, they were offering, let's say, news for free for a very long time over the past, let's say, 10, 15 years. And now they are seeing that the only way to sustain the model is actually to make users pay. And that's where we believe that we need to all work together, okay, to really support these different business models. And we are making a lot of changes on the Google side as well. For example, we moved from our first click free policy on Google News, meaning that before, a news organization couldn't show paywalls, okay, to users before showing at least 3 free articles. Now we move to flexible sampling, meaning that every news organization can actually show a paywall immediately to them. We are helping them leveraging our machine learning capabilities to better target people that might buy a subscription model. And we are helping them actually making the conversion process frictionless in terms of login, sign up, and let's say pay with Google. Also, something else that we are doing is that we want to incorporate, let's say, the subscriptions that users have even into Google News and Google search results. So then we can better expose their content and we can prioritize the content of these news organizations. So we are really trying to make everything possible to really support news organizations to build, as we said, a more sustainable business model.
We're going to have to wrap it up, but just on a final, the other thing that Google and Facebook could do is take a slice of their billions in profits and maybe just donate to the news industry, which is in peril. We've had a good chat. Giles, Trendle, Morwen, Alfonso, Mark, Chris, thank you very much. We have to be out of here at 3, so give it up for the panel, please.